It's about time for another Coach Life. Today might get deep. On my way to school, I was listening to a YouTube video from about 5 years ago. It was two black professors, one economist and another, I think it was two economists actually, but one of them was more a traditional economist and the other was more, he was making a case for reparations, excluding slavery on the grounds of the conditions and treatment and systemic oppression of black people in America. Again, pardon the noise, it is what it is. And I started to think about it. There are some significant historical moments which, unless America comes to terms with America's history, it'll be more detrimental to white folks than the black folks. Clearly, we can go through just about anything. Whether we can achieve success on the grounds of what is without some kind of significant pivot is another concern altogether. But these two professors were laying out the case for reparations for white folks in America. Langston Hughes has a poem which has always had tremendous resonance in my life, and it's called A Dream Deferred. And he asks, what happens to a dream deferred? A dream deferred, does it fester over and soar? And it's a beautiful poem, but I think he was addressing the American dream and also the African American, the black, or at the time the Negro's perspective in regards to the American dream. Now, how is this already 2 minutes in? This is crazy. Anywho, I'm gonna make a case for reparations for white folks. In other words, coming to terms with America's heinous acts in present day so that people can walk on ground that feels semi-stable, not madness. Because what we have now is madness. And if it feels like stability, you are standing on atrocities. Why do I say that? Well, let me just make the case and then you can do the judging for yourself. After slavery was abolished, about 150 years ago, remember, slavery was 400 years of oppression. Let's just call it 250 of overt slavery, and then 150, I don't know if you think people just turn off an economic system like a light switch, like slavery on, slavery off, but it takes generations for even those who were against it to not be complicit in the powers that be, which enabled it, fed off of it, and most of that built America as she stands today. Wall Street was built by slave labor. Anywho, let's make a case excluding slavery. Ta-Nehisi Coates also did this. In 2016, the UN made a case for reparations for black Americans. The UN. Anywho, here we go. You ready? After slavery, formerly enslaved people, black folks in America, were promised 40 acres and a mule. 40 acres and a mule. There was about 4 million freed black folks in America after slavery. 4 million. They were promised 40 acres and a mule. Now, the stipulation was 40 acres was for a family of 4. So let's say magically you can divide the 4 million into families of 4. You have 1 million, which means it should have been 40 million acres. They saw 0 acres and 0 mules. Aside from that, black folks mustered up their own ingenuity and wherewithal to accumulate about 16 to 19 million acres of land on their own, fresh off of slavery. You think it was easy to buy land at that time? You think it was easy to retain land? You think, anywho, let's not even talk about the inception of the Klan and all of that. All right. So that's just what was owed and was not paid. And then the black folks accumulated about half of that just off of their strength. And then they were, through acts of terror, pure political might, any way you could fashion it, they were stripped of their land to a point of decimation, essentially. They were no longer significant landowners. And that's only continued. So we're just talking about 40 acres and a mule that was promised to the free slaves, and that never happened, and what happened following that. Moving forward, let's go to, should we go to the Red Summer of 1919, let's go to Black Wall Street, 1920, 1921. But before remember, this is 100 years ago. This is not a long time ago. We're in the 21st century. This was the 20th century. I was born in the 20th century. Red Summer of 1919, Black Wall Street, a couple of years following. So in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a neighborhood called Greenwood, extremely prosperous black community. This is gonna ring a bell when I bring up gentrification. An extremely prosperous black community. Doctors, hospitals, banks, schools, about 30 grocery stores. 30 grocery stores. This is a booming community. Lawyers. One day, white folks decided they had enough of seeing this black prosperity. Whatever incited it is irrelevant. But they razed the town. They burned it down. Now, the common narrative was a mob of angry whites went through and killed a bunch of people and burned things down. There were eyewitness accounts, some still alive today. I think there's 2 or 1 remaining witness of burning of Black Wall Street. Eyewitness accounts said there were airplanes. They thought they were getting bombed or whatever, but no one, the newspapers didn't cover it or whatever. It was not accepted. And then it turns out there were actual airplanes helping to burn down this. Now, I ask you, who had access to airplanes at that time? 1921. It's a pretty new invention. When did the Wright brothers? They used airplanes to demolish this town. Who else? When do we use airplanes to? Okay, what was the charging? Okay, so we're talking about reparations in regards to helping white folks understand white folks. Maybe it's just a historical reparation. That being said, it wasn't just Black Wall Street in the Red Summer of 1919. This happened in dozens and dozens and dozens of towns all across the United States, where black people, through the improbable, after not getting the 40 acres that they were promised, generated their own land ownership and wealth. After being stripped of that, again, built up their entire communities, again, banks, and then again, was stripped of it. Now, let's fast forward to, there's a lot of stuff that it would take a longer coach life than this, but let's fast forward to 1980s. And so let's skip through the redlining and the systemic oppressions and segregation and all of that. Let's skip through what we cover in history class. Let's skip through the civil rights era even, and the amalgamation of civil rights, labor rights, equality. Let's skip all of that and just go to 1980s and the crack epidemic. The United States government, through the CIA, facilitated the sale of crack cocaine. Well, let's just say cocaine, right? Crack is a process of converting cocaine into a kind of candy version. It's more impactful, it's cheaper to buy, but it's also rocket fuel, turn people into zombies. So what happened was there was a war going on, and the Contras needed funding, but the United States government decided not to support it publicly, so they supported it covertly by bringing in cocaine, raising money, and flooding black communities with this crack epidemic. This is documented. I'm not making this up. Do your research. There have been admissions of guilt and no reparations, but so the black community has had to endure a lot. I would hate to argue that the crack epidemic was the most significant, but it was the most significant to me because I witnessed it. I saw heroes turn into zombies overnight. That's how powerful the drug was, and it was specifically on our black community. If we contrast that with the opioid epidemic today, where it's a public health crisis, the crack epidemic had multiple prongs. So first, it destroys our community. Second, it takes away all of our leadership, because if you had any knowledge, like I had to do everything in my power not to become a crack dealer. The fact that I'm here and not dead or in jail is actually quite a feat. How many white people can say that? This is today's history, right? So it destroyed our community, left our mothers and grandmothers to raise our new generation, us, me, because all the father figures either had to hustle or they had to defend themselves in a toxic environment. There's millions of us in jail for distributing crack cocaine because it was, the most feasible way to generate income in those communities. And, did I say that the United States government was, and it was even more heinous because it wasn't like they just directly did it. They did it through other means. If you're not familiar with Freeway Ricky Ross, the real Rick Ross, I suggest you do your research. Not the rapper, the real Rick Ross. He played tennis. He was a kid from California, Oakland, I believe. He played college tennis. His college coach ended up being his plug. He just so it destroyed our community, not just through the crack dealers, drug dealers were painted as villains. If you look at the opioid epidemic, there's still a little bit of that, but it's looked at as a public health crisis. This is all our problem now. And when crack hit, it was just a black community. So they created these laws that said a gram of crack was equivalent to 10 grams of cocaine. The sentencing was the equivalent 10 times that. So that one was most significant for me. Now, let's backtrack. Actually, no. Let's go ahead into gentrification, because people don't like to discuss it because it's your present history. Gentrification. When a black community builds itself up to be of value, you don't understand. They had to go through X, Y, Z, elemental P, A, J, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for generations. But they know that. We keep our oral history. We keep our tradition. We know. So gentrification is covert oppression. What we're saying is, let the market sort themselves out, those who can afford to live in these new constructions. And so the private equity comes in with massive amounts of money, which obviously the black community has been stripped of remember, we're not even talking about slavery yet. So we're just talking about post-slavery. And then we want to pretend that the playing field is even. And, you know, if you have $2 million, you can buy this distressed property in this distressed duplex in Harlem and convert it into an Airbnb for all of the hipsters to come visit. You see, people don't want to look at it through the lens of race because it's a little too real. It means, wait, there's some things that's not adding up here. I believe Ted Turner owns about a quarter of the entire black land ownership, farmland. One Ted Turner is equivalent to 12 million black folks in terms of ownership and power, economic power. So you might say, okay, so how is this a case for reparations to benefit white people? Well, if you don't know your history and you go ahead and gentrify a neighborhood because you think everybody else is doing it, and you don't understand why people think gentrification is so heinous, and you can only view it through a lens of economics and recent history, then you don't know the momentum and the patterns which you are perpetuating. So I'm not trying to make anyone feel bad. I've actually gentrified, I'm sure. Not through race, obviously, through economic mobility with regards to, if I'm here, that means I'm displacing someone who was here. They spent all their life force building up why do you think people want to go to these places in the first place? It's because there's a culture there. Well, why do you think there's a culture there? Because people lived there and built it. They had to endure the times which were not so pretty. Just because you construct a stainless steel building with floor to ceiling glass and all of a sudden it's seamless and it feels like there's no mice or you still got mice or roaches. Like, somebody's got to deal with them. They're just going to go to where they normally. So you can't build on sand or moving lies. And what we have largely in America are moving lies. I'm not trying to paint anyone out to be the bad person. I'm not trying to make anyone feel bad. I'm just trying to give you a little dose of the truth. I'll tell you one more story and a case for reparations for white folks' health, and then I'll sign off. A baby Bakila. I've told this story a million times. The question is, why would such a historic feat not be taught in history? What's the purpose? Is there some person behind a curtain pretending to curate a narrative so that people can be desensitized? I doubt it. But what is the actual purpose of keeping historical feats out of history? For those that don't know, a baby Bakila was a substitute runner. He ran the marathon. He trained on the Abyssinian Plateau in Ethiopia. He was the first black African to win an Olympic gold medal. He won in 1960 in Rome. If you do your research on Ethiopia and Italy, the socioeconomic context is rich. But he was a substitute runner, 1960. Adidas was a young company, didn't have a proper shoe for him, so he could choose to run with improper footwear or run barefoot as he trained on the Abyssinian Plateau. He ran barefoot in Rome, various terrain. It went from day to night, so a lot of it he couldn't even see. Not only did he win the Olympic marathon, he smoked the world record. The world record. He ran the fastest marathon ever, barefoot, in 1960. There's video. That's why we tried to make a baby Bakila Day. Hopefully it becomes a thing, but in the case for reparations for white folks, I want you to consider something. Why don't you know about a Bebe Tequila? And now that I've told you, it's on you. Ciao.